Okay, so we want to get anthropologists into the financial world. Now you would think the biggest problem in all of that is the hiring process, because you've got to find anthropologists who want to go into finance, and you've also got to find financial institutions who want to hire anthropologists. But the more I delve into this problem, I think that that's not really the problem. I think the main problem is it's not just about hiring anthropologists, it's about creating a workplace environment that is actually going to use them. Because right now it seems like there's a little bit of a trend of hiring people who have anthropology degrees into the workplace. And it makes sense. They have invaluable skill sets. They're trained to think in systems, they can observe power dynamics, and they have an in-depth understanding of how culture works, all of which is hugely beneficial in financial corporations. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter how many anthropologists you hire, if you don't have a workplace culture that knows how to embrace that kind of interdisciplinary thinking, the anthropologist won't add any benefit. Generally speaking, the financial world is quite quantitatively focused. They want data, right? They want things they can see on graphs, on spreadsheets. They want key performance indicators. They want to see, has a person made X amount of progress towards a specific goal over a set period of time? Which is great, but it's not necessarily how anthropologists work. Anthropologists are trained in a much more qualitative way. They're used to looking at cultural systems and human behavior in a long-term, in-depth way that's very subjective. So there's a very clear misalignment between how anthropologists work and the financial system. And more specifically, corporate HR systems in finance are just not built to recognize the kind of value that anthropologists bring to the table. In fact, most of the HR frameworks that these massive financial institutions use tend to reward things like speed, standardization, and quantifiable output. Human resources officials often struggle to evaluate the contributions of those with interdisciplinary skills, especially when they don't align with the typical return on investment models. Okay, so then what's gonna happen? Anthropologists are gonna come into the workplace and they're just gonna be sidelined. Everything they do is kind of gonna be ignored, it's gonna be background noise. They might be branded as the type of people who just study culture in the corner and don't actually do anything. Okay, let's take Janine Ward as an example. She's an anthropologist who worked at JP Chase for over 8 years, and she brought anthropological insight into the financial world in lots of different ways. Like, she brought it to mergers and acquisitions, for example. But her job wasn't just about understanding culture. She also really wanted to get the chief financial officers to understand that the most successful leaders understand culture and human behavior as much as they understand capital. But the impact that Janine Ward wanted to have on the institution isn't easy, and it massively depends on what kind of workplace culture you have. Now, I think that's where HR comes in. Because HR isn't just the department of who gets hired and who gets fired. They also kind of set the rules of engagement, right? They set a culture of what is valued in an employee, what is going to be rewarded, what is going to get promoted. But if HR departments in these massive financial firms are still relying on old ways of doing things, if they're still relying on these frameworks that value quantitative success over qualitative success, then anthropologists are going to get stuck. They're going to get left behind. They might be squeezed into roles that don't really fit what they want to do. Okay, so if we're serious about getting anthropologists into the financial workplace, a few things need to be thought through. You need to think about the culture of the workplace. Are they going to embrace an anthropologist? But you also need to think about the HR frameworks that are currently in place. Are there HR frameworks that can embrace and value people with interdisciplinary skill sets? There needs to be a little bit more space for slow knowledge and systems thinking. Perhaps not just valuing what someone does, but actually valuing if an employer comes in and changes the way that everyone views the workplace. So yeah, anthropology has a lot to offer finance. But unless we build workplace cultures that actually value what they're trying to say, we're not hiring change makers, we're completely hiring ghosts. And human resources has a massive role to play in that.